So lately I've been working on my final university essay, and obviously I had to pick a theme for this research. And as a graphic design student, I've always had an interest in aesthetics and beauty, what works and doesn't, graphically speaking. So eventually I picked the theme of beauty and goodness from the classical era to the contemporary era. So, I think it is undeniable that we are all in daily contact with the theme of beauty related to goodness. And I also think that in the human unconscious, those two concepts are practically linked together. If you think about it, in any field that has to do with aesthetics, let it be art, design, even socially when you're relating to people, these are all topics where you intrinsically think that what you see that satisfies your vision is automatically something that's beautiful conceptually too. However, that is not always the case, and as a graphic designer, I myself am practically obliged to deal with this theme, which I believe, regardless of the person, is a very interesting concept to explore. And this is the main reason why I wanted to start this research. One last note before actually starting the video is that since this is a research, I've taken many informations from videos and articles online. So if you're interested in watching those sources by yourself, you can check the description below the video where you'll find everything that you'll need. So I'd like to start talking about this essay with the concept of Kalokagathia. What is Kalokagathia? Basically, during history, the man has always tried to get closer to a common beauty as much as possible, marginalizing what is considered ugly and unsightly. And the most characteristic example of this was the Hellenic civilization. In fact, the Greeks coined the expression Kalokagathia, which is also known as kalos kai agathos, and it's nothing more than the substantivization of the adjectives kalos, which is Greek for beautiful, and agathos, which is good. This term was used to describe the ideal of a man's physical and moral perfection, that is, physical perfection accompanied by moral beauty. And despite being a concept that's been shared throughout the ancient world, it found its maximum exponence in ancient Greece. So, since ancient Greece has been an example for European culture for many years, it was brought as the main philosophy in the European cultural ideal of the following years. The concept of Kalokagathia, then, is strongly linked to classical civilization, obviously, and in particular to its myths that we all know, because all the epic heroes from Homer onwards are presented as kaloi kai agathoi, which means obviously beautiful and good. So, characters like Aeneas, Achilles, Ulysses all have in common beauty and virtuous gifts that make them noble characters and examples for those who enjoy these stories. Cupid and Psyche is an ancient tale that has been attributed to Apuleius' metamorphosis, and within the story, Psyche, which is a beautiful girl who cannot find a husband, becomes the attraction of all the neighboring peoples who offer her sacrifices and call her Venus. So the goddess Venus, jealous of the name that's been stolen to her, sends a son Cupid to make her fall in love with the ugliest and greediest man on earth. However, the god fails, and the arrow of love hits his foot instead, making him fall madly in love with the girl. Cupid kidnaps her and takes her to his palace, where by requiring that the meetings take place in the dark so as not to incur in the ire of his mother Venus, they start their love story. One night, Psyche, however, instigated by her sisters, with a dagger and an oil lamp decides to see the face of her lover, but a drop of oil falls from the lamp and burns Cupid, who feels betrayed and runs away. Psyche will then have to undergo various tests that the goddess Venus will assign to her in order to win Cupid back. However, I don't want to dwell too much on the story itself, as much as on how Cupid and Psyche relate to the fairy tale of Beauty and the Beast. Many scholars say that Cupid and Psyche could be precisely the origin of Beauty and the Beast. Because in fact, despite being two very different stories, they have similar subjects and elements. So first of all, we have the element of imprisonment. Both Belle and Psyche are forced to stay inside a place where they cannot escape, and where they must remain in contact with a beast. Psyche, however, finds a love nest there, while it takes some time for Belle to get attached to her brute landlord. Another similarity between the two stories is the jealousy of the sisters of both heroines, who push them to do something that hits their partner. Psyche burns his lover with hot oil to see if he's actually a beast, as he says, while Belle goes away for too long, weakening his partner. As for this, I'm not strictly talking about Disney's version of Beauty and the Beast, but rather of Villeneuve's and Beaumont's version of the fairy tale. We see the concept of beautiful and good in the figure of Christ as well, to which an aesthetical beauty is added to bring people closer to the Christian religious creed. This beauty, however, actually recalls the traits of the Normans rather than the Israelis, and is a type of representation strongly influenced by the Greek depictions of Zeus. I think it's also interesting to talk about how children were depicted in medieval paintings. Now, it is important to note that during the Middle Ages, the clergy and nobility were practically the only social classes that could afford to commission a painting. Intentionally, the clergy commissioned medieval artists to represent baby Jesus and Mary, but Jesus in these paintings looks like an old man because the philosophers of the time believed that Jesus was born perfectly formed, and therefore medieval artists painted the adult Jesus by representing him through the baby Jesus, through his appearance as well. The change in style happened towards the beginning of the Renaissance, and it happened for a couple of reasons. Places like Florence were getting richer, and churches were no longer the only places that could afford paintings. Members of the bourgeois could have their babies painted, and they wanted them to look beautiful and not like old men. And that's because the Renaissance was all about the classics. They looked at Roman and Greek art, again, Kalokagathia, which was all based on idealized forms that abandoned medieval abstraction to embrace material beauty, and the thing remained that way until today, because once again, man has always tried to get as close to a common beauty as possible, marginalizing what is considered ugly and unaesthetic. Always speaking in the religious sphere, there has always been a close and undeniable historical connection between Judaism and Christianity, a relationship, if you like, of love and hate, especially from Christians to Jews. In order to separate themselves from their religious origins in Judaism and stabilize not only a difference but also a superiority over the other religion, Christians began to make Jews partakers of Jesus' miracles through art, but mocking them in a certain way, portraying them with hooked noses and features more like those of an undead than a human, blind to the divinity of Christian miracles. This way of depicting marginalized individuals has been preserved over time, and you can take, for example, the racist American cartoons of the early 90s, where black people were depicted with exaggeratedly marked features and gigantic lips. But we also have examples in the contemporary world, no longer in the public mainstream media, but in memes. I would like to take the example of the Happy Merchant in this regard. The Happy Merchant is a drawing that depicts a Jew based on anti-Semitic visions, giving him characteristics such as greed, manipulativeness, and the desire to dominate the world. This drawing was drawn by Nick Bugas, which is a white supremacist comic artist who drew the character in a racist and anti-Semitic comic that promoted a world without Jews and blacks. The character was extrapolated and posted on 4chan in a board that was particularly known for being politically incorrect and for the openly racist feelings of its users, and from there it became a meme. So, all that cannot be understood, all that is antagonistic in some way, is marginalized, stereotyped, ridiculed to make it so that it has less power. to make it weaker and more psychologically confrontable. On the contrary, in certain other areas, ugliness is used as a way of highlighting danger and wickedness. Sometimes it may be that a movie actor looks older or younger than his original counterpart should, or maybe that he has a different musculature or hair color, but these are small changes that are easily forgiven. On the other hand, it is difficult to find an established actor who is completely the same as the description in the book. What matters to me the most is the phenomenon of adaptational attractiveness, which means when a character in a book or in any original source is described as unattractive or even deformed, but then is played by a conventionally attractive actor in the film adaptation, nullifying important physical flaws in the original source, since they are also reflected in the behavior and the psychology of the character within the events of the story. There are countless examples of characters that have undergone changes in appearance, making them conventionally more beautiful, including Hermione Granger, Tyrion Lannister, and Samantha Cook. However, I would like to avoid talking too much about it in this video, as I would like to take the time to pay homage to the user Trope Anatomy and his video, which was a kind of inspiration to start this whole research. You can find the video link in the description. In any case, adaptational attractiveness does not always imply that the personality of the character in question is washed away, overwhelming the character and making it more sterile, but it is often linked to an attractiveness factor of the film itself. If we know in fact that in the film that we want to see there is an actor we appreciate particularly, we will be more inclined to go and see him. The same thing given the fact that, for example, when buying a product, there is more possibility to choose something more aesthetically refined than something with a poor design. On the contrary, we talk about adaptational ugliness when a conventionally attractive character in the source material is made less conventionally attractive in the adaptation. This can be done in the case of evil characters to make them more obviously evil. Think about Cruella de Vil, who in the original book by Dodie Smith was depicted as a sensual young woman, while in the Disney adaptation she assumes the appearance of a hag.
Miserable darling as usual, perfectly wretched.
Or in general, it can be a case of ability over appearance, if it is decided that an actor not as handsome as the character in question can play the part well. In this case, the best example I can think about is that of the film adaptation of The Shining by Stanley Kubrick. The protagonists in the book are described as a normal American family between 30 and 40 years old. In the film, however, Stanley Kubrick gave the part to Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall.
Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall.
The latter of whom was chosen to give Wendy's character a more fragile look, as the character would have had to go through a whole series of shocks throughout the story. Kubrick felt that by giving the role to an actress with a non-too-attractive appearance would have made it easier to sell the part of the character as the story went on. Other examples of this can be found in characters such as Samwise from The Lord of the Rings, the companion and gardener of the protagonist Frodo. In Tolkien's novel, Samwise does not exhibit any particular characteristics that make him handsome or ugly, but in Ralph Bakshi's 1978 animated film, he is depicted as a fat, clumsy hobbit with a squinting eye and a large nose and chin. The same thing happens to Madame Maxime from Harry Potter 4, who in the film is aged, giving her a very grotesque look and behavior. Eventually, the evolution of the values of society and metaphors connected to appearance have meant that we also began to rethink the design of the characters connected to their role. Because if you think about it, the idea that a good character must always be beautiful is substantially quite mundane and does not reflect reality at all.
Are you a good witch or a bad witch? but I've already told you, I'm not a witch at all. Witches are old and ugly.
I am a witch. I'm Glinda, the Witch of the North.
Oh, I beg your pardon, but I've never heard of a beautiful witch before.
Only bad witches are ugly.
So, not everything that is traditionally reputed to be ugly has to be linked to something nefarious, because in reality, it is often the opposite. We see a historical example of this concept with the famous character of Dorian Gray, where in the novel by Oscar Wilde and the respective films and TV series inspired by it, such as Penny Dreadful or even the 2009 film, the beautiful protagonist, initially an inexperienced youngster, becomes aware of a certain Lord Henry who introduces him to a spoiled life and becomes corrupted by drugs, crime, and various sexual encounters. He does not notice the progress of time because his essence is trapped inside a painting which depicts him. However, it becomes a sort of reflection of what he himself has become, and as time passes, old age and corruption manifest themselves in this portrait. Another example of what I'd like to demonstrate with this research is linked to the past of Abercrombie & Fitch, a New York clothing brand that has always aimed at a marketing strategy focused on trendy young customers with sizes no larger than 44, thus excluding the 64% of the American population, through advertising campaigns focused only on the physical perfection of the models, characterized by an almost statuesque beauty, and by advertising campaigns with continuous sexual allusions, which have rarely been successful given the fuss created. This interview, released by the former CEO of Abercrombie & Fitch, Mike Jeffries, sparked a great dissent on the web, so much so that a blogger named Jess Baker started a photography project where squeezing inside the brand's largest size t-shirts was photographed in poses reminiscent of those of Abercrombie & Fitch's advertising campaigns. This put the company further in difficulty, and the words of Mike Jeffries have done nothing but further compromise the image of the brand, falling into an aesthetic delusion, considering that the brand is aimed at a target of teenagers and young adults. We only hire people who look good, because people who look good attract the attention of good people. The connection of beauty to good behavior is often questionable. I think maybe this is the point I want to make with my research, and such a statement by a CEO of a large company could not be anything but self-destructive, because this immoderate demand for aesthetic standards that in a society where bulimia and anorexia are problems of great importance, especially among young people, no longer attracts the public, but repels them.
Oh yeah, that sounds fantastic.
The absurd discriminatory policies pursued by Mike Jeffries are to be short-lived, and with them his career as CEO, which was halted in 2014 to make room for a series of changes to their marketing policies, including the elimination of explicit sexual images. Always on the subject of physical ugliness, I think it is necessary to make a parenthesis on the Hunchback of Notre Dame, but I suppose we all know the story in one way or another, so I would like to dwell more on 3 other films that I believe communicate the same message, if not even more interestingly. That is the physical pathology that acts as a limit, preventing us from seeing the good spirit and empathy beyond physical appearance. The first 2 films end in a more dramatic way, while the third one is more, dare I say, reflective, but to avoid spoilers, I will only explain part of the plot. The Elephant Man, Mask, and Wonder. In The Elephant Man, we see the biography of Joseph Merrick, a man afflicted by a genetic malformation that causes him numerous deformations in different parts of his body. Joseph makes his living doing street performances, and one day he meets Dr. Treves, a doctor who helps him get hospitalized, and as the days go by, the people around him become aware of his kind and sophisticated personality. Mask is a similar movie, where this time we are told the story of a boy named Rocky who suffers from Leonitis.
They call it lionitis. It means look of the lion. You new around here?
who despite his condition does not feel inferior to the others and often even jokes about his condition as a deformed boy.
First we have Miss Nancy Lawrence. Where are you, Nancy?
Where are you, Nancy?
Wow, thanks a lot.
Our other new student is Mr. Rocky Dennis, also in the back.
Wow, thanks a lot.
Arriving in a new school, however, he's not accepted and is seen by others as a monster, but he slowly manages to win the trust of some of his classmates and eventually graduates. We're then shown a sort of forbidden love story between him and a blind girl that he meets during summer camp. The girl falls in love with him as she doesn't actually see him, and focuses therefore on things less related to physical beauty, such as his personality and voice. But after the summer camp, Rocky doesn't hear from her, because her family doesn't want her to hang around with him. Wonder also tackles the issue of illness during adolescence and tells us about the life of August Pullman, a 10-year-old boy with a craniofacial malformation who faces life within the school system for the first time. The film focuses in particular on the friendships that he makes within the class, bullying and the ensuing betrayals, but very interestingly, it also addresses August's condition also through the eyes of his family members, particularly his mother and sister. Another film that shows this interesting concept is Midsommar by Ari Aster. The whole film is a sort of auteur psychological horror, which, as typical of the director, induces a strong sense of discomfort in the viewer, not so much for slaughter scenes, as in most horror movies, but for the disturbing shots and almost dreamlike situations that are shown. The trailer, in particular, is paradoxically the element that connects us to the film, but at the same time detaches us. Observing it, the common viewer expects to go and see the usual horror movie. However, he will find himself in front of a much more refined movie that does not contain the usual banal clichés of the horror genre. In particular, in the trailer we see a scarred boy, and we expect him to have a central part in the movie, because culturally we're led to think that people with mental or physical disabilities embody the horror and ugliness of action. Think about antagonists from Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Nightmare on Elm Street. So we think the boy is the villain of the movie, while in reality not only is his character treated almost like an extra, but he is not the villain. The villains are, actually, all the beautiful blonde, blue-eyed villagers. Even in Bluebeard's fairy tale, there is a sort of reversal, in a certain way. Bluebeard is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting fairy tales out there. The antagonist of the story is an ogre-like man who is deemed ugly due to his cobalt-colored beard. He decides to marry a beautiful girl, who over time becomes more and more corrupt and spoiled by the comfortable life that Bluebeard has practically given her. Seeing this change, Bluebeard decides to test her by giving her the keys to his castle, including a key to a room where he forces her not to go while he's traveling. However, despite his warnings, she still decides to betray his husband's trust by spying in a forbidden room and finding the corpses of his old nosy spouses. So upon returning, Bluebeard discovers that she has gone to spy in the secret room and tries to kill her, but in vain, because he is pierced by the swords of the girl's brothers who are nearby by pure chance. It comes natural to ask, who is the real villain of the story? Bluebeard for hiding his secrets, or his wife for breaking his trust? Another movie is Anomalisa, which is a very interesting 2016 film made in stop motion that analyzes the theme of monotony. Michael Stone, the protagonist, is a famous British motivational speaker and author of the bestseller How Can I Help You Help Them, who has lost his sense of connection with everyone, basically.
I think I might have psychological problems.
This is shown with the artistic decision to give each non-main character the same facial features and the same monotone voice. This is a particularly interesting choice because it makes us, the audience, understand that we are seeing the story through the personal vision of the protagonist. Anyway, Michael goes to Cincinnati for a conference, staying at the Hotel Fregoli, and in this hotel he meets Lisa, a shy fan who covers her right eye with her hair due to a facial disfigurement. In the eyes of the protagonist, however, this disfigurement is of very little importance indeed, because the beauty for him does not lie in her physical appearance, but in the different look and voice, which is different, again, from that of any other character in the movie. This makes her unique in his eyes, special, anomalous, hence the title of the movie, Anomalisa, in a world where he only finds people with the same face and the same tone of voice.
Who are you, Donna? Who are you, really?
As the last topic I would like to talk about, I'd like to show you Penelope, a film about the life of a girl afflicted by a curse that has given her nose the appearance of that of a pig. Although it is not a particularly profound, brilliant movie, I still think it can be an interesting food for thought for all of us, because in the end, what we perceive of us that disgusts us, or that we think may be a great flaw in the eyes of others, in reality is often something really less than we think. Penelope spends her life locked up in her home with the knowledge that the curse will be broken as soon as she finds true love. She decides then, inspired by the words of a potential boyfriend, to run away from home and go and see the world outside, which obviously judges her because of her appearance. Once some time has passed, however, she ends up accepting her shape and magically her face takes on a normal appearance. A film with this tries to tell us, in essence, that the beauty that others perceive in us is nothing more than our confidence in the end. With this last topic, my video finally ends. It has been quite excruciating to edit this, but I really hope you found this research educational and that it's brought you at least some elements to think about what beauty really is. Thank you very much for watching. Have a fantastic day.